Okay, thank you very much for coming. My name is Avvy Go, and I'm the Clinic Director of the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Leo Clinic. And on my left is Margaret Parsons, Executive Director of the African Canadian Leo Clinic, and Mr. David Lepofsky on my right. He is the Human Rights Reform Representative of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. And we're here today on behalf of a broad-based coalition of equality-seeking communities, including representatives from racialized communities, the disability community and labor, and some of our coalition members are also here with us today. Our ad hoc coalition united last spring around a very simple message. Ontario's underfunded backlog system for enforcing human rights and for protecting Ontarians against discrimination desperately needs reform. However, the McGuinty government's controversial Bill 107, which is supposed to fix the system, would in fact make the system worse, not better. So for many months, we and many community groups from across Ontario have called on the McGuinty government to go back to the drawing board to design positive, effective reforms for our underfunded, backlogged human rights system. But instead of doing this, the government is bringing its controversial Bill 107 back before a standing committee of the Legislature starting next Wednesday, November 15th, for public hearings in Toronto. Today, we publicly unveil the next phase in our escalating campaign against Bill 107 and in favor of effective human rights reform. And our announcement today has two key parts. First, we're going to present our counter-proposal to Bill 107. This is our blueprint for effective human rights reform, and David Lepofsky will tell you more about it later. Second, we will unveil our coalition's new multilingual TV advertising campaign against the Bill 107, and Margaret Parsons will tell you more about that. And before they do, I'm going to set the stage by explaining what Bill 107 is about and why it's controversial and what is the stage of the bill. As many of you know, the Human Rights Code bans discrimination on grounds such as race, ethnic origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, and disability. To enforce these rights, a discrimination victim now has to file a human rights complaint with the Human Rights Commission. The Commission is the public law enforcement agency in the area of human rights in this province. It must investigate all non-frivolous human rights cases and tries to negotiate a settlement. When a case doesn't settle and the evidence warrants a hearing, the Commission is the public prosecutor that presents the case before the Human Rights Tribunal. The tribunal can then order a remedy such as financial compensation if it finds that the human rights violation has occurred. There is widespread recognition that the underfunded system is seriously backlogged. The McGuinty government claims Bill 107 would fix this. They decided how to fix the system and introduced Bill 107 last spring without first holding a open public consultation. Bill 107 does not strengthen human rights enforcement. In fact, it weakens it by taking away most of the Human Rights Commission's mandate to investigate and publicly prosecute human rights violations. You do not strengthen human rights enforcement by weakening the very enforcement agency to do that. Bill 107 would require discrimination victims to investigate their own case and to present their own case before the Human Rights Tribunal. Who will represent the discrimination at this victim at these legal proceedings? The government made the extravagant promise that it would amend Bill 107 to ensure that every single discrimination victim will get a publicly funded, free, independent legal counsel to handle their case, regardless of the complainant's income. Yet it has been months, and we have so far seen no specifics on how they plan to deliver on this promise, and no new budget to pay for it. The bill has passed second reading in June. The Conservatives and the NDP criticized the bill in the Legislature and voted against it on second reading. The bill has 3 days of public hearings last August outside of Toronto, and we're going to tell you a bit more about these hearings in a few minutes. But for now, David and Margaret will give you some more details about our campaign that is starting today. David?
Thank you. It's not enough to criticize Bill 107. It's very important for community groups who want to see human rights reform to come forward with a positive, constructive, and alternative. And for our first plank in our campaign that we're unveiling today, we're doing just that. We've developed and are making public today a 4-page blueprint for effective human rights reform. This document was designed after obtaining broad input from equality-seeking communities, after reviewing and taking into account the widespread criticism of Bill 107, and after taking into account the input the government and the Standing Committee of the Legislature have already received at the Standing Committee hearings last summer. We are hoping that this blueprint will become the rallying point or focus of attention at the public hearings into Bill 107 that are going to resume here in Toronto starting next Wednesday. We are offering it as the counter-proposal to Bill 107. We are not here to praise the status quo in the enforcement of Ontario's Human Rights Code, but to offer an alternative on how to fix it. Now, our blueprint brings forward some 24 recommendations crammed into 4 pages, but we want to basically distill it down to 3 important principles or themes. They are these. First, no effective reform of human rights enforcement in Ontario can take place unless the government is prepared to come forward with new, permanent, ongoing, and substantial increased funding to the human rights enforcement system. This system has been underfunded and starved by government after government for years. And we are now suffering the consequences of that. Whatever be the shape of the reform, whether it's our proposal in our new blueprint or Bill 107's seriously flawed model, whichever reform the reform will take, there must be substantial new funding for the system, or the reform is doomed to fail. Any reform that doesn't include substantial funding is mere window dressing, and window dressing is not what we need now. Now, it's reasonable to ask how much money is needed. We are not in a position to develop a precise budget. The government is in a far better position to do that after getting input from the community, including the organizations that are mandated to enforce our human rights now. However, we do some simple math and offer it here. The current funding for the human rights system, including the Human Rights Commission and the Human Rights Tribunal, is around $14 million. If one were to increase it by an amount like $6 million, which we just offer as a basis for discussion, this would be a significant increase in terms of the human rights system, but would not make a significant dent in the provincial budget. We want to emphasize that it has been months since the government came forward with its announcement last February that it planned to reform the human rights system, and yet we've seen no commitment of permanent new funding. At most, we've seen some rhetoric about small and inadequate amounts to deal with transition costs to move from the current system to the one the government proposes. We had a budget in the spring which included no specific human rights funding announcement. It's far too long overdue for us to get this funding now. So that's the first principle. The second proposition or recommendation that we build our blueprint on is this. Ontario's human rights enforcement system must be a public enforcement system. What does that mean? It means that when a non-frivolous human rights complaint is brought forward and filed, it must be publicly investigated and, where needed, publicly prosecuted by the law enforcement agency that our law sets up for this purpose, the Human Rights Commission. That commission needs to be renewed, revitalized, reformed, and, as I've mentioned, given more effective funding. but it must be the vanguard. It must be the lead agency involved in human rights enforcement. Bill 107 doesn't do this. Rather than fixing, improving, and better funding the Human Rights Commission, Bill 107 strips it of most of its mandate and largely privatizes human rights enforcement. We say that's wrong. We say that any new reform must start from and be based on the acceptance that in Ontario, human rights infringements are public wrongs and they must be publicly enforced, or at least public enforcement must be used to root out violations and to provide remedies to their victims. Our third and final core recommendation in our brief is that any reforms to the human rights system must not take away any of our existing rights. And we focus today especially on the rights that we are guaranteed when a human rights case goes before the Human Rights Tribunal for a hearing. Right now, our law guarantees that a party before the Human Rights Tribunal has the right to call evidence, cross-examine opposing witnesses, and have control of the presentation of their case. Bill 107 proposes to give the tribunal the extraordinary and excessive power to override those rights. This bill lets the tribunal, for the first time, make rules that would override or contradict or deny those basic rights. We say that's wrong. The idea that the government has of guaranteeing more access to hearings seems to be contradicted by their plan that once you get to those hearings, you're not entitled to the basic guarantees to make sure the hearings are fair. We agree that the Human Rights Tribunal needs to be reformed, that its proceedings need to be shorter, less formalistic, and less distracted by procedural technicalities. We've proposed very narrow, specific changes that would accomplish that. We don't agree that you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that you need to give the human rights tribunals, whose members are politically appointed, unelected, and unaccountable, the extraordinary and excessive right, the blank check, to override any and all rights that we are now guaranteed under legislation in Ontario for a fair hearing. That is killing an ant with an atom bomb. We don't think the government needs to go that far. So those three core principles lie at the heart of our blueprint. There is one other proposition that underlies it that I want to mention briefly. This blueprint is aimed at helping ensure that the McGuinty government does not betray an important commitment that it made to the disability community last year. In the 2003 election, Premier McGuinty promised us a new Disability Act, and he promised that that act would include effective enforcement. Once he got elected, his government asked us, the disability community, what effective enforcement we wanted in the Disability Act. We said we needed a new independent enforcement agency. That's how you get effective enforcement. The government said, no, we're not going to give you that, but you can still have use of the public investigation and public prosecution powers of the Human Rights Commission. Now, we ended up settling for the Disability Act, even though it didn't include everything we wanted, because it was a good package. However, Bill 107 proposes to betray that understanding by taking away, for the most part, the investigation and prosecution mandates of the Human Rights Commission that we were told we could count on. We say that's not fair either, and our blueprint would ensure that that betrayal of our understanding doesn't take place. Margaret.
Good morning. Let me tell you more about our campaign's second plank. We today announce a new television ad campaign in opposition to Bill 107. This campaign goes to air in the next few days. Our ads will run in 6 languages, including Arabic, Cantonese, Punjabi, Tagalog, Tamil, and English. We have copies in the ad here on DVD for the media. An English translation of the non-English ads is included in your media kit, and you are free to use clips from them in your coverage. We're timing the broadcast of these ads release to lead up to and run during the public hearings. We are running these ads in all these languages to make sure voters in these diverse communities are fully aware of the McGuinty government's plans to weaken the Human Rights Commission. Our ad focuses on the same message we've championed since last February. Human rights cases needs to be publicly investigated and publicly prosecuted. Human rights enforcement should not be privatized. As the next election is less than a year away, we hope our multilingual message in these ads finally resonate for the McGuinty government. We've chosen to run these ads in 6 different languages because of the importance of a strong Human Rights Commission for all Ontarians of all ethnic and linguistic origins. We are all voters, whatever our race, our sex, our religion, our language, our sexual orientation, or our disabilities. An election is just a few months away, and every vote counts. Just as we raised Bill 107 in the recent Toronto by-election in the spirit of nonpartisanship, we want all parties to know that we're ready to raise this issue in the next general provincial election. We plan to hold accountable at the polls any party or politician who weakens protections for our human rights. We also want to make it clear that our message is shared by many from communities that seek equality. The 3 of us presenting today reflect Ontario's diversity in terms of disability, gender, religion, and membership in racialized communities. Our various communities often deal with the government as separate silos. But today we show how we have united behind a cause that is important to all, one the McGuinty government cannot keep ignoring as the next election quickly approaches. Let's show you the English version of our TV ad.
If you believe in human rights, listen up. The McGuinty government says it's trying to fix our human rights system, but its plans will make things worse. Instead of giving the backlogged, underfunded Human Rights Commission the money it needs to do its job, McGuinty plans to take away legal guarantees needed to make hearings fair. If Bill 107 goes ahead, we won't get the justice we need. Don't let Dalton McGuinty take away your rights. Call the Premier's office today and say no to Bill 107.
A message from the Coalition to Protect Human Rights.
So, to conclude, I just want to give a brief update on the status of the bill right now. Some of you may have read the article in the Star a couple of weeks ago that the bill is on life support. The government would not have faced all this criticism had it done the right thing, as we asked last spring, namely hold a public consultation before, not after, it decided on its reform plans. And last summer, I guess it's just past summer, public hearings were held in Ottawa, Thunder Bay, and London. And despite peak holiday season, the hearings were booked to overflowing. Not all presenters were reached. Of the 39 presenters who took a position on the bill, 28 opposed the bill. 11 supported the bill, but of those, most gave the bill qualified support. They said they will support it only if it received substantial amendments. The McGuinty government should have taken a loud and clear message from those hearings. Bill 107 had to be taken back to the drawing board and be rewritten from scratch. It's now fully 7 months since the bill was introduced and 9 months since the government first introduced its plans for the human rights reform, and yet they still have not listened. Back in June, the Attorney General said that he planned to bring forward amendments to the bill. Today, we are still waiting. The resumption of the public hearings are just days away. We emphasize that this is no answer to many of our concerns about this bill for the government to finally bring forward details about its plans for a new human rights legal system. No legal clinic can serve as a substitute for a better funded, revitalized Human Rights Commission. No legal clinic can provide timely legal representation by lawyers to 2,500 or more human rights complainants every year, and the many more who need advice on whether and how to file a human rights complaint. The Standing Committee on Justice Policy has advised us that more than 200 individuals and organizations are on the list seeking to present at the hearings. We strongly believe that every single person who wants to present must be given a time slot to present at the hearings. This bill cannot finish hearings and full clause-by-clause debate before the legislature rises for the holidays this fall. We would strenuously oppose the government invoking the draconian measure of closure to cut off the hearings and ram the bill through third reading in order to muzzle its critics. And finally, we want to thank the New Democratic and Conservative parties for voicing many of our concerns of this bill. And we urge all parties and all members of every single party to commit to our blueprint for effective human rights reform. So if you have any questions, we're now open for questions.
How much is this campaign costing you?
Actually, I don't have the figure on that, but we can get it for you afterwards. And it's in terms of the TV campaign, the rest of our activity is largely the community organizing activities is largely being done by us as volunteers or as part of our other activities. And the TV ad campaign right now, we know it's going to run at least a couple of weeks, and depending on how things unfold over the next weeks, it may run longer, so the cost may be greater. But we can get you the figures after.
Where is it? Is it running right across the province, or?
It's going to be running on Omni Television. I believe that's through cable. That ought to be able to. It's certainly going to reach the broader GTA, and I believe that ought to be able to reach outside Toronto as well.
How many community groups that are behind this television ad? How many people are coming up?
The coalition itself, there are a number of, there are groups from the African Canadian community, Chinese Canadian community, many immigrant advocacies group, the Arab and Muslims group, South Asian communities, community.
Primarily Toronto groups, or?
Some are national organizations, some are provincial, and some are local. There's some legal clinics. So it's a wide range of various agencies and community groups.
And just to, so we formed rather quickly and informally in the spring as to coordinate efforts in opposition to the government's plans. So we're not sort of a strictly structured organization. We work kind of ad hoc. So there's a core group of us who've been doing a lot of the lead work on it, and then there's a much larger group of people who've been taking our work and running with it in their local communities and giving us feedback that feeds back into our proposals. And the fact that resonates is reflected if you look at, for example, the Hansards of the 3 standing committee hearing days in Ottawa, Thunder Bay, and London, where community groups in those communities echoed at a rate of more than 2 to 1 our concerns and our recommendations. And that included folks that we haven't had direct contact with who've picked up our information through others or through the internet and have echoed it.
Back on the cost, first of all, I'm surprised you don't have that figure. It's sort of an obvious question for this press conference. But TV ads are expensive, so I think it's safe to assume we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here, correct?
No, we can
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Right now, the cost for making the ad was free. Everyone in the ad is all volunteers.
I'm not talking about the cost of making the ads.
But the
Cost of airing the ads. Yeah.
for the 2 weeks will be a little under $10,000. And as the folks on the panel suggested, right now we're looking at a 2-week run, and after that it'll depend.
So when are they airing? 3 in the morning or something? I mean, that's a very modest TV
They
ad
will
campaign.
be running on all of the news programs in the specific languages that are aired in specific
You mean
languages.
evening news?
Yes.
But only on Omni, not, I guess,
Yeah,
not
no,
like
the
CTV.
ad buy is for Omni, and it is, I believe, a combination of morning, noon, and evening news programs that are in the specific languages of the ad.
I noticed that you're running the ads in 6 languages. You don't include French in that. I was wondering if, it is the other official language. Is that, is there some reason why you haven't sort of produced it in the country's other official language?
I guess we're trying to reach out to groups who are traditionally people who might need the Human Rights Commission, tend to be racialized communities, immigrant communities, and so we picked those, 6 languages because of that reason.
And the other consideration, I mean, obviously, we're not working with big bucks. We're community-based groups. We don't have the kind of resources that the government has to put these kind of things together. The government, when they ran their announcements for the hearings in the 3 cities outside Toronto, as I recall, only ran them in English and French. They're doing them multilingually for the Toronto hearings, but not in other languages. So we're trying to particularly reach communities that haven't been reached before.
What specifically do you see at stake here if Bill 107 passes the way?
Well, what it boils down to is this. The Human Rights Code is there to protect people against discrimination in the workplace or in getting access to jobs or housing or goods or services. We have a great Human Rights Code. It guarantees broad rights for people, whether it's discrimination because of disability or sexual orientation or race or religion and so on. But that only means something if you can enforce those rights. The mechanism for enforcing them right now is the Human Rights Commission. As we said before, it's backlogged because it's underfunded. So it needs to get fixed. What the government's proposing to do, rather than fixing the public enforcer, is to largely take it offline and make people enforce their own rights, and then has made these vague promises for which they've not ponied up any money to provide private lawyers, which is, for one thing, way more expensive than a public enforcement system, and second, takes the public out of public enforcement. It makes this all a matter of private dispute. So what we see at stake is 2 things. The first is there's going to be less effective enforcement of human rights, and that's pretty bad. And the second is it sends a terrible message to the public that human rights infringements are no longer a public wrong that should be predominantly enforced by a public law enforcer. They're going to be privately enforced. Yes, the Human Rights Commission under Bill 107 will have a capacity to do education and research, but we don't think you prevent discrimination or achieve equality by just giving speeches and handing out leaflets. It'll have some enforcement powers to bring its own cases, but way less than it has now. So what's at stake in the end is 2 things. Poor enforcement and poor protection for human rights, and a terribly wrong signal to the public that human rights are no longer a public wrong that the public should stand up to the plate for. It's a private wrong that individuals should enforce themselves, and hopefully the government will give the lawyers that they've promised to do that, but we're not holding our breath after all these months.
Also, this bill will not, if it passes, will not improve or strengthen the protection of human rights in the province. It will not clear up the backlog that we've been asking government after government to fix. All it will do is just shift the backlog and shift the lineup to a new doorstep, which is the tribunal. And in fact, it will weaken the human rights system in the province. So it is not a bill that's forward-looking and progressive and looking at strengthening and improving the human rights system in Ontario.
Why do the likes of Catherine Frazee and a former Supreme Court judge and 40-odd legal clinics disagree with you?
They disagree with us on some things and they agree on others. So that, for example, everyone agrees the system needs to be fixed. I think pretty much everybody agrees the system needs more money. Everybody agrees that those who work at those who preside at human rights hearings at the tribunal and who preside as commissioners of the Human Rights Commission shouldn't be just political appointees. They should be subject to an independent screening process, not in Bill 107. So, but
direct access.
okay, they disagree. I mean, we can't really speak for them, but at least I think that, and they're in a better position to answer than we. But we think the Human Rights Commission, if properly funded and reformed, can be fixed so it will do its job more effectively. And the core essence of the direct access proposal seems to be that it can't. So that in some for some reason, and I suspect the other factor which a Toronto Star column about a month and a half ago focused on, which is this bill really has it boils down to two words: trust us, trust the government, trust that they'll make fair rules at the tribunal, trust that they'll provide money for effective for a chicken in every pot and a lawyer for every complainant. We don't.
We don't and they do.
Well, whether they do, they can answer, but we don't, and that's as far, we can't speak for them, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to. But the bill rests on the assumption of trust that the government is going to deliver on things that that hasn't been delivered on for years, and this government hasn't delivered on for the 9 months since they announced the bill.
Yeah, and I think the main point is that the bill is premised upon the government's promise to set up legal support for the human rights victims, which is in fact not in the bill itself.
Yeah,
And
enabling clauses are in the bill.
It says they can, it doesn't say they have to, and saying that they can doesn't actually add anything to what they could do today.
it says it may, actually, it doesn't
Yeah.
even say it can, it
Yeah,
may.
yeah, it says
So-
may, but even if it said it shall, that enough doesn't mean that they've got to fund sufficiently to provide the level of service that the government has talked about.
Yeah, and in fact, the government has not made any promise at all whatsoever. The only thing that we have heard is the $2 million transitional fund.
Right.
There's no permanent increase in funding. So you cannot have a system where 2,500 people are going directly to the tribunal without funding for the legal representation. It just does not work.
And in the end, I mean, there is two other points. One is also, I mean, I don't pretend to speak for folks on the other side of this debate, but we are very critical of the giving this extraordinary power to the Human Rights Tribunal to make rules that override the important right to control your own hearing, call relevant evidence, and cross-examine your opponents. At least at the Standing Committee, the few who have appeared supporting the bill don't appear to be concerned about that, and that's a disagreement that is profound and important, but it's a disagreement. And the other thing is this: we say the way you fix a human rights system in any event is not for the government to not hold a public consultation, take carte blanche the position of one side of a debate, of a legitimate debate, and run with it in a bill, where we have to fight where we're now fighting a rearguard action. The way they should have done it is to have opened the doors and had a legitimate debate between folks from both sides of this issue, and try to come up with reforms and find a consensus before they introduce a bill. They didn't do that before February when they made the initial announcement, and between February and April, when the government introduced the bill, their public position was, we've consulted enough.
Your sense is, and the Attorney General misjudged the situation, misjudged the issue?
I can't second guess why they do what they do. All I can tell you is the results of what they've done. That's may not be a satisfactory answer, but it's the best I can do. They certainly haven't handled it well. As a counterpoint, let me give you a counterpoint. When the McGuinty government was elected in 2003, as I said before, they promised us a Disability Act. They also promised an open public consultation before they introduced it, and they delivered on that promise. They held hearings around the province. They had a member of the legislature presiding at those hearings. They had meetings with us, with the business community, with government at the table, very candid meetings where we could exchange ideas before they came forward with their disability bill. And the result was they got a bill that was supported not only by the Liberals, but by the NDP and the Conservatives, not only by the disability community, but by voices from the business community. There's a way to do it right. And that disability bill, you'll remember when the Harris government was in power, was quite controversial. There wasn't an agreement on how to proceed as between the parties and within the community. We had our view, and the Harris government sure didn't agree with it. But when a really effective open consultation was held, the government was able to deliver an effective reform, and that's what we got. Why they didn't follow that mandate here, only the government can explain.
There may be a view for some in the community that the Human Rights Commission has become a large and slightly sort of unwieldy bureaucracy that many really don't see the need for anymore. I mean, in an enlightened society like Ontario in 2007, perhaps, many people feel that, you could scale it back now. What answer would you have to that?
But I don't think that is the reason why the reform is being introduced. I don't think the government is saying that we don't need human rights enforcement anymore. In fact, they are promising that the human rights enforcement system will be strengthened. They recognize that. But they are just proposing something that we don't think would do the trick. And even those who are supporting the bill are not saying that we don't need human rights enforcement. They just think that we may have a better chance enforcing it through the tribunal as opposed to through the commission.
By the way, even just two added points to add to what Avvy said. The first is if you look at the deponents who've appeared already, even the minority, the small minority who support what the government's doing, agreed that the government, or at least a number of them, I should say, agreed that the government's cut back too far on the Human Rights Commission, even for them. I'll tell you this, members of our community, our communities, are not shy and aren't unwilling to voice their concerns. They've got lots of stories about the problems of the backlog. They're not all saying, hey, the Human Rights Commission's great, it's doing a fabulous job, leave things as they are. To the contrary, we get the same feedback from our communities as the government and everybody else does about the frustration of the delays and the backlogs and the lack of resources. But when we came forward with the message from our communities that the solution is to mend it, don't end it, or at least don't rip out its teeth, a lot of people came forward saying to us, you're right, that's right. And that's the message that we've been carrying forward since. And as I said, if you look at the hearings from last summer, that's the message that's been echoed by a lot of folks. Now, on the question you've asked about, is the commission itself sort of bloated and too big? Look at the actual budget numbers. Look at the number of offices around the province that were cut in the 90s under the Harris government. Look at the staffing, which their reports give you the actual staffing levels, but they've gone significantly down from the peak. And the problem isn't sure that it grew too big. The problem is they got more cases, the cases are more complicated, people have more expectations, and they got no more resources.
Also, I don't think the government's introduction of the bill is based on the premise that a Human Rights Commission isn't needed, or the debate on both sides isn't based on the premise that a Human Rights Commission isn't needed. It's based on the premise that the Human Rights Commission is valid. What we want is to see it improved and strengthened, and that we feel the bill isn't doing. The bill, in fact, is weakening, it's cutting back, and it's in essence, in some ways, dismantling of the commission. And we feel the fact that they get over 2,500 complaints a year tells you that Ontarians see the Human Rights Commission as a valid part of this government, of the life of this province, and the fact that it's needed. So I think that it is a valid institution, and it is recognized and respected internationally, and I think we have to ensure that that it's improved.
And also, I just want to add that, I guess it's interesting to see different opinions among the various equality-seeking groups. But if you look at the statistics at the Human Rights Commission, disability cases are the largest number, the number one type of cases that the Human Rights Commission receive, and followed by race-based cases. And you see in this debate, the racialized groups and the groups from disability community are the ones who are most concerned about cutback to the Human Rights Commission. Mm-hmm. And this is in part because that these are the very same groups who rely most on the commission, as well they have the least ability to present cases on their own. So having the commission on their side is very, very important. Having an effective human rights enforcement system is very important.
Are there any amendments do you think the government could introduce that would salvage the bill, or should it just be scrapped?
Well, we've asked the government to be, and we've said this quite publicly, to be prepared to consider amendments that may rewrite the bill from scratch. We'd like to see reform, and frankly, we've got a government that says they want to do reform. And we're months before an election, so as community advocates, the stage is set for possibly very constructive reform. The amendments we'd like to see should track the blueprint you've got there. And the government's already conceded that the bill needs amendments. The Attorney General said that back in June in the Legislature. They still haven't made them public, but they said they need amendment. And we've written to say, can you tell the public what your amendments are going to be before the hearing, so people can come forward and know what it is they're really commenting on. The government hasn't, made public anything further than that yet. But so we say we'd rather. The worst possible result is Bill 107 as is passing, or tinkering with it but leaving a direct access model as the way human rights are going to be enforced. The preference is for them to come forward with bill amendments that would substantially rewrite the bill along the lines of our blueprint.
Are you disappointed with Barbara Hall as the new chair of the Human Rights Commission?
I don't think we could really comment on that at this stage.
And Barbara Hall has nothing to do with the bill itself, so.
She's expressed her support for.
Well, it's interesting because the government has written letters saying she's expressed support, and her website at the same time made it clear that she was concerned. She's also said publicly that she supports. I can't give you the exact words. You can pull it off the internet, but she shares many of the concerns from community groups. Now, we would prefer if she would vocalize those publicly. As far as we've seen, unless we've missed it, we sure haven't seen that vocalized publicly yet. So, and she's also publicly supported the government, our call last spring for proper community consultations before a bill is introduced. And the government didn't listen to her on any more than they listened to us on that one. So on those scores, obviously we're in the same camp, though we would prefer if the commission would put if the chief commissioner would put her criticisms of the bill on the public record before the hearing, so people can know what they're all about.
Can I ask you before you leave your names and what media outlets you're with?
I'm not good with
Because
faces.
you didn't introduce.
I'm card.
Okay.
I'm Christina Blizzard.
I'm Murray Campbell.
What Globe and Mail, and Christina, you're with?
Toronto Sun.
Okay.
I'm Shinta Pak, same with the Canadian Press.
Okay, great.